There we go. Okay, I'm gonna start over in my mid-sentence, but you take these age-old themes and you really put a fresh twist and spin on things, and in such a clever way that we've never seen really done before. And the way you play with time, it was just so well done. Can you tell us a little bit about your inspiration for the story and how in the world you even thought this whole scheme up?
Yes. So this book was kind of a weird conglomeration of a few different things. I normally get a idea, like an initial story come kind of like in a picture, and it didn't really happen that way with this book. I normally like get this picture in my head that's very visceral and I'm very inspired by it. And then my story development process is to figure out like, where is this place? Who is this person? Why are they here? With this book, my initial seed of an idea was on a scouting trip I took to Asheville, North Carolina. We were thinking about relocating here, and we did. I live here now. I have for like 4 years. But I was on a scouting trip by myself, walking around in downtown Asheville, which is a little mountain town in western North Carolina in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And there's a lot of art here, a lot of street art, a lot of like, installations everywhere. And I was walking around downtown and I saw these like little doors on like ankle height, like ankle level. And in the middle of nothing special on this street, just on the side of this like old brick building were these little doors, like almost like a little fairy village or something. And I was just so struck by them and thought they were just so adorable. And I took pictures of them, and it just planted this thing in my head of this question of like, if I opened those doors and they went somewhere, where would it go? And my initial feeling was that they would maybe go to the same place, but in the past somewhere, like maybe that building, what was some business like in the past. And if I opened that door and walked through it, like, would it take me there? And so my imagination kind of ran away with this idea, and I was on this trip by myself. So I feel like it kind of just spooled like out of control. But then when I moved here, and I started spending time in the little farming towns that all like surround Asheville, it really like I just felt like there was really a story here. And books often reflect kind of what I'm going through personally as well when it comes to themes and things like that, questions that are being asked. And I feel like I was in a place when I was developing the story where I was kind of reconciling like the choices of the past and, the life I chose and all of these things, and kind of like re-choosing them again for a second time. And so I feel like it kind of just all came together in this mishmash of a story that I really did not I didn't really plan it. I feel like it kind of really took shape when I was drafting the book, and I wasn't sure where it was going to go.
Wow, that's incredible. Thank God for those little doors. I love that.
I know.
Yeah. I think too, when I think about this story, just the Farrow women and this long line of powerful women who just had this really beautiful, intricate bond. You just focus on feminism and just the role of that. Did you set out to write a story about that, or did that kind of come about as you were writing?
I really didn't set out to write a story about that, but I feel like my books all wind up being about that in a way. Like, I feel like as a storyteller, I'm kind of writing about the same things over and over in some ways. And that is one of them. But I did know that the bond between the different generations of the women in this family was going to play a really important role. I did not know how they were all going to be interconnected. And when I wrote the opening scene, when she's at the funeral and she's thinking about her grandmother, I knew there was going to be a very like full circle, very interwoven kind of story between their bond. And then, as we're going back into the family, these other women start appearing in my brain, and they all had a very significant role to play, like a different role, but very significant role to play. And I am very moved by that idea, the women in your life that you would, you would go to those lengths for. I posted on my Instagram, the book is dedicated to my two oldest friends, my best friends from high school, who are still, I'm very, very close to them. I was just texting with them like 10 minutes before I got in this event. But I posted on Instagram when I was talking about the dedication that, they're two of the only people I would walk through the red door for, right? The way these women did for each other. And so that is something that once it really started brewing, I really grabbed hold of emotionally as a writer. And it kind of became this through line in the story, which wound up, it was kind of like a surprise to me.
I love that. I think too, oh, go ahead, Ivana, were you gonna?
Oh, it's so fascinating to hear your ideas, just because when we read a book like this, you're like, what was she thinking? And how did you come up with this? And where did you go? Did you start, the question I was always wondering is, did you start from beginning to end? Did you just go in order as you were writing, or are you just kind of like all over the place, jumping back and forth? Do you have like a giant map board in your house where you're just remembering who's where and what are they doing? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, this book is the messiest project I have ever worked on by leagues, by leagues. So I always draft linearly. I start at the beginning, go to the end. But when I did the first draft of this book, I didn't have so much of it figured out. It wasn't until I got to the end that I started really seeing how everything was connected and figuring out how the mechanics of the time had to work. And so I feel like I did like a 0 draft. Then I did like a first draft that added so many story elements that I didn't know were going to be in there. But I had to keep meticulous track of everything. And because so much changed and had to get refined and corrected throughout the different drafts of the story, it was really hard to keep track of everything. And wait, was that from that draft or this draft? And wait, no, his birthday has to be in this year because it gets offset from when she crossed the door here. And, it just everything was all hinging on these little pegs in the story. And so I had way more notes in an extensive timeline of each Farrow woman's life. And even how they had to correspond with each other and overlap. And then my copy editor, my poor copy editor, when you get a book copy, a book always goes to copy edits before it's published. And, they're normally just fact checking things or correcting your use of a word or your grammar or your punctuation and things like that. This poor copy editor, when I got my copy edits back, had pages and pages and pages of timeline checking where she had to find every tiny hole in my book that I had left, because it's impossible to do it perfectly just from one person's mind. And then my editor had to weigh in, my agent had to weigh in, different people in marketing and sales. They had so many people read it to catch any holes that had been left behind that we could no longer see. Because once you see this, once you know the story, you can't unknow it, right? And so it's very hard to catch plot holes. And so this was a very extensive process. My copy editor was like, man, I wish I knew who that copy editor was so that I could just send her a bottle of wine or something. But it was a huge undertaking, honestly, that no writer can actually pull off alone. You have to have all these other eyeballs on it to actually execute what you're trying to do.
And how long did that take you, that process?
I wrote this book, the multiple drafts that got me to the more final draft. I wrote them over a year. And there were breaks between for other deadlines and projects that I had. And then that editing process, like it took a while. It did. I mean, like not long compared maybe to someone who wasn't on a contract deadline, right? But like it was just passed around so many times, and I had to read it so many times that by the end my brain was just mush in my head. It was really exhausting.
Turned out great.
Yeah. In our book club discussion before you hopped on with us, Jody had a quick question. I don't know if we ever got to like a clear answer, so maybe we can.
We'll see if I have it or not.
Hi, first of all, I'd like to say that I love your book. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I did want to ask you though. Okay, so when she goes back to Eamon and she finds out that she had already been there, hadn't she already left Nathan at one point?
Her mother left Nathan.
Or wait, not Nathan, Mason, her friend.
She had not. What do you mean she had left him at one point?
Because they were in this friendship and she had grown up with him. But it sounds like she had visited Eamon at one point because they had the baby. So didn't she disappear from his life at one point?
Yes, she did. And so
and he never said anything?
Well, the second time that she leaves her timeline, she leaves earlier than the first time she did it. So we'll see if this makes sense the way I'm explaining it, but all those things she's remembering about her and Eamon, or her and Mason together, right? Those all happened in like the span of a year, because when she first came to the pass through the red door and met Eamon, it was 2022 or 2023, whatever. I can't remember the exact years now. But the second time, so she goes, she lives a life there, right? And then she decides to do what she did. But she makes sure that the next time she comes earlier than she did before. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Okay. So Mason did experience losing her twice, but because she went back earlier in the time, not back, but she kind of starts the timeline earlier, they never even get to that point. You know, like they never reach that point in the timeline because she leaves early.
Okay.
It's very hard to explain without visuals.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate your explanation of that.
You're welcome.
Why didn't anybody say anything to her?
Yeah, and that's how, like, during that time is when their friendship turned to more, you know? And so she never actually experienced that, but her previous self did. And that's what she's remembering. Are those moments that never happened for her, but they did but the last time she came through the door.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So did you have like a big board? I'm picturing like a CSI, like murder board with like red yarn everywhere. Did you have like a physical space like that where you were manipulating like time plots, or how did that look like? What did that actually look like? Or was it just a Word doc? Or
I did. I mean, I had to keep everything written in an actual document timeline, but I am very visual. It's very hard for me to keep track of information that's just like on a list. And so I had a huge whiteboard. And if you go back into my Instagram, like a year ago, or I don't know, sometime, I posted kind of like a teaser where it was just scribble on paper, basically. And it was like, this is the whole plot of my next book. And it's still on my feed if you want to go look at it. But it was that, but much bigger on a huge whiteboard with a lot more like labels and like all these things on it. But that was honestly that one image. It's like a timeline that goes scribble back. And then it's like all these overlapping things. That's the only way I could like keep track of it in my head. And when I was writing, I was constantly referring back to it because I was getting so confused, you know, when I was writing it.
Yeah, that's incredible. Laura Beth had a question for you. Laura Beth, are you free?
Yes, and I know why you're calling on me because, well, first of all, thank you so much for writing this novel. I'm in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I love that it was set near me. It's so beautiful. But I wanted to ask, would you ever consider writing a time travel novel again? Because you know how much work it was, how much time you put in, the copy edits. What do you think?
I would have to just be so enamored by an idea that like I could not let it go, because writing a time travel novel is very challenging, right? It's very difficult. But I think the real challenge is once it goes out into the world and readers start reading it. If readers hate it, right?
Yeah.
If they hate it, and readers are very hard on time travel novels because they're like, that doesn't make sense, you know? And so I knew I was taking a really big risk by writing, as far as like pleasing readers. I was taking a big risk by writing a time travel novel. And I have this huge sense of relief that people have liked it. Like, this book has gotten a great response from not just my readership, but people who are new to my readership, right? Who have never heard of me, have never read my other books or anything. And I feel like that is all you can ask for if you're going to write a time travel book. I'm like, I would never want to risk it again. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, I did it. I survived. I did it well. I'm proud of it. And it was seriously like so stressful and just, like I said, it truly creatively exhausting, that I don't know that I would throw myself back into the gauntlet unless like a story idea took me by the throat and like would not let me go and I had to write it.
Well, take a bow. I think you did fantastic. And I think you landed in a room of people that also agree that it was really beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, we were talking before you hopped on about, I don't know if you follow your ratings on Goodreads or your reviews, or I know authors, like, I think they tell you not to do that, but I'm sure curiosity.
I don't as a rule, like as a personal, like boundaries, like a mental health rule, right? Although I will say a majority of authors do, even though they know they shouldn't do that, right? They do, but I'm pretty strict about it. But I know it always gets back to me somehow, right? Like, because I'm tagged in stuff online, or just like chatter, or like my mom being like, the ladies at church are talking about this book, you know, like things like that, that are, it does still get back to you, even if you try to like insulate yourself. And I know, even the book was just nominated for Book of the Year with Book of the Month, which is a really big deal. And so those types of things you can't ignore, you know, like you can't like hide from them. And so I feel like the overwhelming response for the book has been really positive, and I've gotten many more messages and like emails from readers about this book than any of my past ones. And so I do feel like it has struck a chord with my readership. And so, yeah, I feel like, but Goodreads, no, we do not go to the bad place.
Okay, well, your rating is amazing on there, and it's quite impressive. Yeah, yes, I won't tell you. Just you can let me know if you want to know, but it's awesome. Yeah.
I don't need to know. I'm gonna live in my like imaginary world where everything's perfect.
Yeah, it's so good. So yes, Jess had a question, if you're free, Jess, about some fun like little Easter eggs that you may or may not have put at the beginning of the book for some foreshadowing. And I want to see you, Jess. Are you around?
Yeah, I'm right here.
Okay, perfect.
Hi. Thank you so much for coming on. I absolutely loved your book. I listened to it on audiobook, which was fabulous too.
Yeah, the narrator is really good. I was really happy with her. I listened to the whole thing and I loved it.
Oh, yes. So when I finished, I had some questions, so I went back. I didn't listen to all of it, but I did at least start the first part of it again. And I was listening to it, and I noticed a little bit of foreshadowing that I hadn't picked up on. when Birdie and June are talking, and
I hope you're gonna say what I think you're gonna say.
And June says, like, drive safe, and then Birdie says something like, okay, mother, something like that, as like a joking thing. I'm like, oh my gosh, I missed that. And it's actually her mother. So
yes, and you know what? You're the first person to ever ask me about it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Love that line. I love that little moment. And I thought for sure that so many people would like pick up on it. And I'm sure plenty of readers have kind of gone back and been like, oh my gosh, but no one has ever like brought it up to me. And so I feel very satisfied that you noticed it.
That is awesome. I love it. I wasn't sure what my question was going to be, if you put that in kind of after you did your first draft, when you kind of figured everything out, or if you already kind of knew. I don't know.
I'm pretty sure that it came in my second draft, like my second full on draft. Because by then I knew more about Birdie, right? And the conversation was already kind of similar, of her kind of mothering her. And then I put that line in, and I was so happy with that. I just loved it.
I loved it. It made me so happy too. And oh my gosh.
It's like, yes, mother.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you.
Jess, you're such an astute reader. I feel like you always pick up on little things like that.
I know, that's sharp.
Oh, you're so sweet, Kelly.
So about the audiobook, that was another question that I had. I listened to the audiobook as well, and Brittany Presley was incredible. Like, I feel like I could just listen to her all day, and she just totally swept me away with her narration. Did you have a say in the audiobook narrator? Did she narrate your previous books at all?
No, she doesn't, but I was extremely, extremely picky about this audiobook. I'm involved in not every author has the ability to do this, but I'm very lucky in that both my YA and my adult audiobook teams are very collaborative. And they let me be a part of the process if I have recommendations, or like somebody because I listen to audiobooks all the time. If there's somebody that I think would be really great, I get to suggest them, and they can reach out and ask for an audition. And then I get to hear auditions and be a part of the selection process. This book was much more of a stressful process because I don't remember her name. The other person who said she lives in Greensboro will probably relate to this. Yes, because she has a Southern accent. This is why I'm saying this, because I grew up in Texas, and I pretty much don't have an accent. But when I watch things or listen to things where someone is faking a Southern accent, it drives me bananas. Like, you have to be good at it. Also, what drives me crazy is when someone has like is supposed to be, in South Carolina or whatever, and they have like an Oklahoma Southern accent. Like, there's a lot of people who aren't from the South don't hear the differences and the different accents, and there's like, it all sounds the same, right? No. And if any of you watch the show Sweet Magnolias, this is a perfect example of it, because I love this show, but like every actor on the show has a different Southern accent, like a different regional Southern accent. And it drives me nuts because they all grew up in this little town in South Carolina. So anyways, because of this, and because I've listened to some audiobooks that had really over the top cheesy Southern accents, from the very beginning, I was like, all I'm asking is that you do not like get someone who's going to do a horrible Southern accent. And that's why the accent is pretty light. I wouldn't even call it a true North Carolina Southern accent that Brittany Presley does, but I was so like anxious about it being over the top that I was like, it has to be light touch. And in the end, I was very happy with it, but I was kind of a nightmare during that process.
She knocked it out of the park. Laura Beth,
yeah, she did great.
Yeah, so I'm also from Texas. So what part of Texas are you from?
Okay, you know what's really weird is that as soon as you started talking, I was like, she's from Texas. And then you said Greensboro, and I was like, oh, I guess she's not from Texas. That is so funny. I was like, she's totally from Texas.
Well, it's
I'm from
funny. Most people are
Dallas.
just like, oh, it sounds from the South, but I get you. But what part of Texas do you come from?
Dallas. I grew up in Dallas, and then I left when I was 19 and moved to California for 15 years, and now I'm in North Carolina. But people who don't live in the South don't hear the differences, right? But there's a lot of differences between someone, you know, in Georgia versus Louisiana versus Texas and everything. Exactly. And so I was like, I've got family and friends in Texas who are going to listen to this book. It can't be a bad Southern accent.
Well, and I did listen to the audiobook. So I will say it wasn't distracting. That's my whole thing, is don't let it stand out to where it is obnoxious. And I thought she did a great job. So another Texan living in North Carolina, approval there, but it was, that she didn't have that strong North Carolina that they do, but besides
that's soft.
It was, but it was good. Great. Yeah, she was fantastic. I would listen to her again.
Yeah, I thought she did a great job, and she's done other books that I've listened to that I really like too.
Can I put you on the spot to ask for since you're an audiobook listener, specific audiobook recommendations for us audiobook lovers?
Oh yeah. I mean, I listen to a ton of audiobooks. I just finished it's brand new and it's like a big book club pick. None of This Is True.
Oh,
have you guys seen that one? That audiobook is really good. I love Alex Michaelides, his audiobooks. I haven't listened to the new one yet, but I love he always has like excellent narrators.
It's the same, his new one is the same narrator as his last book. It's so good.
Oh, great. Yeah. Oh, so they're so good. And I mean, both of those are like British, so I'm trying to think of more like American ones that I've been like, ooh, it's so good. And I can't open my app right now to see my library to be like, ooh, this one, that one. But I'll think about it. If more pop in my head, I'll let you know. But I almost exclusively listen to audiobooks because I'm a mom and running around.
Same. I will say, for a Southern accent, Kathleen Early is pretty good too, for Karen Slaughter's books. I don't know if you ever read any of hers, but
but a good friend of mine is like a really faithful reader of hers, and she's always telling me to read them.
Yeah, the audiobook, like she's just really, Kathleen Early is really good. So yeah.
Well, I saw, you're welcome. I saw someone else mention Tom Lake in the chat, which I bought and have not listened to yet, but I have heard rave reviews about that one as well.
Agreed. It's good. Of course, it's Meryl Streep. I mean, how could you not?
I know. I love her.
Thank you so much for answering that.
You're welcome.
Can we talk a little bit about your stunning cover? This is incredible. Can you talk about how this came to be? Did you have say in the cover like you did with the audiobook? How did this masterpiece
and
from this book?
Is it coincidence too that it somewhat resembles Spells for Forgetting? Because I feel like as soon as the cover for this one was released, I immediately connected it to Spells for Forgetting. No, they're not identical, but something about them, the starriness maybe.
This is like the side of books that like readers don't really think about unless you're in the industry. But book packaging, which the cover is the biggest part of that, like the title, the jacket, the interior design of the book, the font that's used, that it's all called packaging. It's so important for sales, for marketability, and to tell readers who are walking past the book on the bookshelf, what is this book? You know, it's supposed to attract the readers that will like it, right? That it's written for. So we've had quite a journey in packaging my adult novels because they don't cleanly fit into any genre. So they are, some people call them magical realism. Some people call them contemporary fantasy. Some people call them mystery thriller. Some people call them romance. Some people mush those things together to make different cross genre labels, right? So we have this huge challenge because there's not a bunch of people writing in this pocket of literature right now. We have this huge challenge of being like, how do we create a book package that speaks all of these things, right? It's not women's fiction. It's not a romance book. It's not a mystery novel. So how do you evoke all of those feelings and get somebody who loves those things to pick up the book and look at it and like feel like, ooh, I think I'm going to like this, right? It's all psychology. So with Spells, this was like a huge process, and we just went through so many different iterations, not just with the title, but also with the cover. We wound up with something we really, really liked, and readers really seemed to respond to it. So with the Unmaking of June Farrow, and to answer your other question, I do get to be involved too. Again, very collaborative teams who are just really wonderful, where a majority of authors do not get that privilege of being involved. So with the second book, with the Unmaking of June Farrow, we had this big challenge of being like, okay, how do we make it feel like that book, but it can't look like a sequel to that book? Because that's confusing. So we have to be like, it's another book. You'll like this if you like Spells for Forgetting, but it can't match it. So the fact that I think the reason it kind of feels like that cover is the kind of starry quality, the little like glimmery like star things in the font, the trees, it's naturey, it's got an earth tone palette like Spells does. But the first version of that cover, which it was my favorite version and that I was so happy with, was more blue than what the final version that you have. And I loved it so much, but sales and marketing made us change the colorway to be more like orange brown because they were worried it looked too much like Spells. So we wound up with a different colorway that wasn't my favorite, but I'm really glad that we changed it because so many people love it. People ask me about it all the time. And I think in the end, it really wound up being like what it should have been for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would have to agree. It's just so eye-catching and just like, it's beautiful. So beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And I have the book of the month one. Will you talk to us a little bit about book of the month and how that came to be? And I'm always curious, how long did you know that it was going to be a book of the month club pick before you could speak of it?
So, book of the month, I've had a couple YA books in book of the month, but for YA, it's not the same thing at all. An adult, if you are an adult fiction writer, you want to be in book of the month. It is like the place to be. It's like the place where new readers discover you and find you because you only have so much reach, right? Mm-hmm. So book of the month is highly prized for me. And for Spells, I wanted to be in book of the month so bad. So bad. My publishing team was just like beating down their door about it. And we were like, because it was my adult debut. And I was just like, oh my God, if it could just be in book of the month, just hundreds of thousands of readers see those books, not just members, but like people who follow their accounts and the ads they place everywhere. And just such a huge exposure opportunity. So Spells was in the final running for book of the month. And then it didn't make it in the very end, but they did make it an add-on book. And so when this book came out, because Spells was very successful as an add-on book, they actually had to go back and reprint it multiple times because so many people chose it as an add-on book. For this book, I was like crossing all my fingers and toes that book of the month would pick it since my other book was successful and their readership responded to it. And when they did finally email us and tell us that they picked it, I was so happy, like over the moon, so happy. But we found out only a couple months before, I think, and it kind of depends on the time of year and how behind they are on like doing their picks. Because the last time I didn't find out, it didn't get picked until like a month before or something, but this time I had a couple months heads up.
Okay. So really not too long in the grand scheme of things,
Mm-hmm.
of like the life of this book before it's being published. Okay.
No, because they're looking at things like, again, on like the industry side, they're looking at things like how many people are adding this to Goodreads on their Goodreads list? How many people are pre-ordering it? Like, they want a good mix of undiscovered versus highly anticipated. And so sometimes they wait till the last minute to pick.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense, and strategic for them, but like tricky for you if you're eagerly awaiting
yes,
to hear from them. I'd love for you to talk more about your role as an author for YA books. And I think you have a nonfiction book out, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. And adult. So you're really like going into lots of different territory here as an author. Can you talk about just what it looks like to write in these different ways? And do you have a favorite, or do you like the mix of things?
I started out in young adult fantasy, which I like for so many years, just loved reading young adult fantasy. And most of my ideas were in that realm. So when I got an agent and when I sold my first book, I got my agent with a young adult fantasy, but before she signed me, she also read an adult manuscript of mine. And it's very much in the same vein as like Spells and June Farrow. So it was always my plan to be writing these kinds of books as well. But, you have to be strategic and build a readership. And I kind of wanted to hold back a little bit until I was established more, because it can also be really confusing to readers if, you're like a dedicated reader of this person and all of a sudden they come out with like sci-fi and you're like, what? And so I feel like we had to kind of be strategic about that. And for me, my young adult fantasy novels are just so fun to write, and they're a little serious for young adult. But I feel like they've still found a great readership. And with the adult, I'm just doing something so different that I think it's been really nice. And even though like they're very, maybe the genre is very different and they're multi-generational and like all of that, I think that people who pick up one of my young adult, or they're used to reading my young adult books, when they pick up one of my adult books, it still feels like an Adrienne Young book because of the writing and some of just like my trademarks as a storyteller. And so I was really nervous about publishing in different age categories like that, but it's actually been really lovely. So I have another young adult duology coming out in 2025. Both books I think will be out that year. And I have another adult novel coming out at the end of this year. And so right now I'm still publishing in both.
Oh wow. So you've got 3 books coming out. Well, 4 books with this one was at the end of 2023. So like 4 books within like just over a 2-year span. Is that correct?
It'll probably wind up being something like that, because this book will come out like in October or November of this year. And then the other books will come out probably like March and like November, something like that.
Wow.
And I won't have an adult novel come out that year.
That's incredible. Like that is
it's been busy around here.
Yeah. Especially too, like just to be, are you editing what stage are you at with your next book coming out at the end of this year?
I am very behind schedule and I am revising it. It should already be done. Like it really should be done, but it's not. And luckily I have an editor who just really trusts me or something. I don't know, because if I were her, I'd be breathing down my neck about it. But so yeah, that book is being revised right now and it should be done in March probably. Okay. And then it'll come out, I think, in either October or November.
Yeah. Well, you've been busy like promoting this and, it sounds like you've got a lot on your plate, but that's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
I saw on your website too, you're really, it seems like deeply invested just in the craft of storytelling and wanting to mentor other authors and give other, maybe some underrepresented women authors a chance to write. Can you talk a little bit about some of these other projects that you're involved in?
Yes, so many. So I started a writing workshop toward the beginning of the pandemic. And it's a month-long virtual writing workshop that just honestly like blew up and evolved in a way I never ever expected. Like I literally was just trying to create a little bit of financial security for myself as a working artist during the pandemic, right? And try and diversify my income. And I'm like, I'll do a workshop. People are home right now. And I know there's a lot of aspiring authors out there. And it just was so wildly successful that it kind of morphed into this big, huge writing community. The community and the workshop itself is called Writing with the Soul. And it's very hard to explain what it is, but if you're curious, it's just at writingwiththesoul.com and you'll get a feel for what it is. But it's just a huge worldwide community of writers who live all over the place from all walks of life, who write all kinds of different books. And now, I mean, it's been 3 years since I started the workshop, and we do retreats together. We're doing a research expedition this year. We're doing a huge writer's residency trip in Bend, Oregon in May. It's just like, it's gotten a little crazy, definitely didn't plan on that. But now a ton of these writers have gotten agents, have sold their first books, are debuting as authors, and it's been really, really cool. So that's Writing with the Soul. Fiction. Thank you, Adrienne. My nonfiction book was a collaboration with a really good friend of mine, Isabel Ibanez, that's called The Storyteller's Workbook. And that's exactly what it sounds like. It's a workbook for writers writing a novel that kind of takes you through all the different stages. And then I've also done a lot of work with just scholarships and grants and, programs for young writers, programs for underrepresented writers and women identifying writers. And that's just become a huge part of all of it unexpectedly, in addition to my books.
Yeah. I was just kind of perusing your website and I just went down this rabbit hole. I'm like, what is this?
Yeah.
There's just so much to discover and explore. And it
is
cool.
a rabbit hole. That's a great way to say it.
That's so amazing though, just to be building up other authors and encouraging them. I know that
very keeps me inspired.
Yeah. I want to go back to your new book too. And at the end of this year, are you able to share a synopsis at all? Or is it like kind of under wraps?
Yeah, still? We haven't announced it yet, but I feel like I can talk about it on here. It's just us.
Yeah.
And if you read it later this year and you're like, that's not what she said, then it's because I'm still revising it. And who knows, maybe I'll change something really important. But the book, again, very similar vein to Spells and June Farrow. It's a kind of a magical realism, romantic, small town mystery vibe. And it's actually inspired by my experience as a twin. I have a twin brother, and the main character comes to live in this tiny Northern California town. After the death of her brother, he dies in an accident, and they've kind of always shared this like mystical connection. And now that he's gone, it's kind of intensified and hasn't really faded. And so she's coming to his town to kind of pick up on this project that he was working on and finish it for him. But when she gets, to meet these weird people in this weird little town, she starts to think that maybe his death wasn't an accident after all, and that maybe he had a lot of secrets in this town and this life he was kind of hiding from her. So yeah, it's, got a love story. It's so much about complicated family dynamics. Like, in those ways, it's gonna follow like a lot of the same themes as Spells and June as well.
I love that. That sounds so good. Kim was wondering if any of your other family members are writers.
My mom is actually a really really talented writer who never explored or pursued it. It's kind of always been like a, maybe one day I could have done something like that. I feel like she's just one of those writers that has like a natural talent that she's just never developed. And she's one of those people too that's always like, I don't know, I'm retired, maybe I'll take a writing class or something like that. And I don't know if she'll ever do anything with it, but she's really gifted. And then my sister and my older brother are also really gifted, but to them it's just fun. Like, I don't know, like my brother growing up, my older brother would write these like hilarious poems and just very cheeky things, you know? And so it's nothing that anyone has taken very seriously, but in retrospect, I can see that like that storytelling gift is like definitely in my family.
That's so cool. Maybe your mom will join in on one of your workshops.
I know, maybe.
Get her in there. I love that. Well, does anyone have any other questions? I want to make sure you guys all get a chance to ask if you've got something.
I don't really have a question as much as I want to circle back to what she had mentioned about the time travel bit. So like I read both books and I just went back and checked my Goodreads. I had a 4.5 on the first one. I had a 5 even before I was finished with this one. So I was like roughly 3/4 of the way through and I already went on Goodreads like, okay, this is going to be a 5 before I even finish. Because this is my favorite. No, but she made a comment. Someone asked, could you write another one? And I've got to give you credit for sticking to your guns, because so without me being like a freaky Comic-Con kind of person, I'm not, but something happened when I gave birth to my son 10 years ago, where, you know, you got time on your hands and whatever. I got into new TV shows, and maybe it was a thing 10 years ago, but these time travel shows kept coming out and I would get super invested. Like they were actually not Star Trek-y. And then 2 years in and they're pulled, and it happened again. And it happened 4 years later again. And I'm like, what is it? If somebody's got a really good line that Hollywood, or maybe in the book world, they can't handle the time travel bit. And yet, you know, you're not looking at it, but truly we were discussing your average rating is one of the higher ones you can see out there on Goodreads. So, but I guess I'm just saying that, and that I agree with you. It's a lot of work. And if it didn't, for some reason, come to fruition, I applaud you to sticking with your guns.
Well, and it's so hard because you cannot control how people are going to react to your book. And like one influential reviewer can post about it and just change everyone's perspective. And it's That's like really the top review. Yeah. Like you just, even if you feel like you did write something good, right? You don't know how it's going to do when it goes out there. And so that's why you have to like take the wins when you get them, you know, and just be like, what is that phrase? Like drop the mic, you know, like go out like while you're ahead on some things. And even like I've had a lot of people ask, like, you're going to go back and write more books like in the spells world or about different people in spells or in June Farrow. And I'm like, I don't know, man, you'd have to really convince me, because I'm like, you know,
I mean, I could see a spinoff maybe from the 50s timeline. I could see something like that where it's not a full-on interweaving of the braid, but which, by the way, I love that metaphor. I don't know if anybody else, I love that metaphor. I was a little girl with mom always braiding my hair, and so I was just picturing the unweaving.
It was a necessity to provide a visual for the reader so they could understand what was happening. Because that wasn't in there really till like one of the end drafts, because it's, you know, readers have to be able to visualize. I mean, there's still a lot of readers, I'm sure, who are confused still and are like, I still don't get it, but whatever. But you know, you have those readers who are taking notes in the margins and they're like, I'm going to get this, I'm going to crack it. And so using those like visual tools, like a braid or like, and then cutting the braid and like stopping the fray, like those visuals help a reader like make sense of something very abstract that you're trying to explain in a story. And so that was like one of the later drafts that I did. And my editor was like, yes, this is what we needed. We needed some kind of visual, you know, for people to latch onto and be able to be like, oh, I get it. So
well done.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm just checking the chat for any other questions.
My praise now, Kelly.
Oh yeah, get that in there, Brittany.
Adrienne, I have to read it because I'll freak out. So I've never before liked anything to do with Vikings, like ever. No movie or show. And then I read your masterpiece duology, Fable, and I was obsessed with you. And then I read Sky in the Deep, and I knew it was Vikings, but I was like, I love you, so I'm gonna read it anyway. And oh my God, girl, no one has ever swayed me to love that theme ever. And it was just so well done. From then on, I read everything you've ever written, and I love it all. So just thank you so much. I also camp in North Carolina, Bryson City, twice a year. So I know how beautiful that area is. And I also grew up in Georgia, so I understand the different Southern accents because nothing like a Georgia Southern accent. And I just want to say thank you for opening all these worlds up for us and just letting us read your beautiful talent.
Thank you so much for saying that. And I love it when people find Sky, because that's for those of you who don't know, Sky in the Deep is my debut novel, first book I ever sold, and is still extremely special to me. And people are still discovering it all the time, which is one of the really cool things about books.
I love that. Okay. Anything else I'm missing? Are we ready for a picture? Okay. Ivana, will you be our photographer?
Oh, I'm on my phone. And usually I of the whole group, but I can only see 6 people on my phone.
Oh boy. So do I have to do it? Do you need to tell me?
I can snag it.
I like, oh, yes, you're here. Sorry, my light is like just trying to attack me here. Okay. All right. Yes, Kirsten, saving the day. Great. I should really learn how to do this. If you have your book or phone with the cover on, then we'll be good to go for a photo op. Kirsten is
all right. I don't know that I can hold the book and do it at the same time. So here we go. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Oh, that did not work. Let me try again. I cut people's heads off. There's a new row that popped up right as I took the picture. All right. Here we go. Try number 2. 1, 2, 3. All right, we're good.
Awesome. Well, Adrienne, thank you so much for joining us. This was incredible just to hear directly from you. And thank you so much for sharing your storytelling talents with us. And we look forward to reading more from you in the future. Oh, Laura Beth, did you have something? Your hand's up.
Yes, I asked for audiobook recommendations, but can you just give us like what you're reading now, what you'd recommend?
Oh, yeah.
I would love to hear.
I am reading The Frozen River right now. Have you guys seen this book?
Ariel Lahan.
Yep. One. I'm reading that next.
Yeah. I've never read any of her books before, but I thought the premise was so fascinating that I had to get it. And so I picked it up. I'm in the middle of that right now, about halfway through. I just finished None of This Is True. And then I also read earlier this month a nonfiction called Bittersweet that was phenomenal. And it's about people who are like bittersweet. Like you'd have to read the tagline and the back of the book to understand, but it was really, really wonderful. And then the book that I read earlier or just like a couple weeks ago. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's a fantasy with like card magic. And now
V.E. Schwab?
No, it's Rachel Gillig is the author, and I'm pretty sure it's her debut. And One Dark Window.
Okay.
Called One Dark Window. And that's an adult fantasy. It's kind of like a romantic fantasy. And then I'm about to read The Fury, which I've been very excited to read. I'm doing an event with him next week in Winston-Salem. And then the other one I'm dying. Yes, it bookmarks. And then the one that I'm dying to read next also is Stacey Willingham's new book. If any of you read her, it's called Only If You're Lucky. And I'll be reading that as soon as I finish The Fury. So it's been a good month for books.
Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Adrienne. We so appreciate you giving us your time tonight and meeting with us. This has been incredible.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for reading and for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, best of luck and good luck. Good job for your kiddos staying out the whole time. I'm impressed.
I know my partner got home a little bit ago. Otherwise, I don't think it would have lasted much longer. So, all right, you guys have a good night.
You too.
Night, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
I'm looking at one of the books that she recommended, this One Dark Window.
Yeah.
And it's got a 4.3 on Goodreads with 85,000 reviews.
What does it look like?
Can you see it?
Recognize that cover.
No, I've never seen it on Bookstagram either. Like maybe it's I'm going to stop recording really quick.